Welcome everybody to our November meeting. It's November 10th, not a Thursday, because tomorrow is Veterans Day. I'm glad to see all of you here today. I just had my agenda. First item is public invited to be heard, and I don't see anyone on the call, but are we expecting, or do we have anyone in the waiting room for that? Okay. In that case, the next order of business is to approve the minutes from our last meeting on September 9th. Do I have a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve.
Okay, and a second from Kimberly. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. I was not at that meeting, so I'm going to abstain from voting. And then I think Madeline, you were also absent. Did you want to vote to approve, not, or abstain? Okay. So I think we've got 6 approvals, 1 abstention. We'll go with 2 abstentions since I didn't hear from Madeline. So approved.
Yes.
All right. Our next item on the agenda is our 2022 agency funding deliberations. And I believe that Eliberto may have something prepared for us.
So yeah, I'm about to share my screen. I just want to start by saying thank you all for taking the time to diligently review and score these. What you are getting, of course, as always, have gone through several iterations, but I was letting Karen know how I am very comfortable with what I'm going to show, and just looking forward to having the conversation about our allocation funding and formula. So the first thing I'm going to start with actually is the allocation formula, because that has shifted a bit since we last talked, and we want to run this by you. I'll share that right now. Okay. Can we all see the allocation formula? So what changed was not the scoring that we all had agreed to, and I modified it based on the weights that we had made. So that didn't change. What changed is Karen and I had a conversation about wanting to really ensure that we reward those agencies that had the highest scores. So before it was 175 and 50%, and we moved it up to 190 and 80%. So those that met the scores received a higher percentage of the request, in part because we have more funding available. And so we felt comfortable doing that, and we really want to demonstrate a commitment to providing more allocation to those that scored well, that answered the questions well for us and the board. Okay, so that is the allocation formula. Below it, you'll see our priority areas that we decided to keep this year from 2021, and our total amount that we have is $1.2 million this year to award. As a reminder, last year we had $877,000, so this is an increase of $400,000, which is really good. So. All right, so now I'm going to go over, unless there's any questions, I'm going to jump to the matrix itself. All right. Can we see the matrix?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So there's a couple of highlighted ones, and I will get to them in a second. But first, I want to show, unfortunately, the 2 agencies that were not funded because they were disqualified because they did not attend their hearings was Rise Against Suicide. And both these agencies would have been funded had they attended. They both scored high enough to receive funding, but they were disqualified because they did not attend their meeting. And then the first highlighted piece is, so Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition missed their appointed time, but did call later on that same evening and have their hearing. And I think the question we had was, what do we do with that? Is there any ramification for missing their time but still showing up that evening? Or so, yeah, I just had a question about that.
Does anyone do you want to go ahead and talk about that, or do you want to address highlighted items?
Well, we can either come back to that, or we can just go through the whole matrix first. I'm fine either way.
I think let's go through the matrix first and give everyone a moment to kind of like see where things land, and then we can come back to address that.
All right, the next thing we got to address is and we can do is Boulder Farmers Market. They are highlighted because they scored well enough to be funded. And because of what they're asking, they've hit the individual limit. And so we'll come back to that as well. But overall, you can see only a few did not, a way forward did not score high enough to be funded. Neither did Medicine Horse. Neither did Queer Asterisk. Emergency Time did high, but they weren't funded because they missed the same against Rise Against Suicide. And then the Reentry Initiative came closer. They were at 78.5, but you need to hit an 80 to receive funding. And is that it? Is that the only agency?
Looks like Senior Housing Options is at a 0.
Yeah, they were really low. They were one of the lowest, so they did not get funded. So those are the agencies that were not funded. A lot were funded at 80%, if not 90. Very few got the 100%, but a lot of them got 80 or 90% of the request. I didn't have the time to do all the analysis like I did last year. But I can tell you that as usual, we're low on housing stability only because we don't have that many people applying. And of course with EFA missing their appointment, that brings us even lower. But even then they weren't asking for a lot. They were only asking for 16,000. And we're always high on education. And you can see that, for example, YMCA actually got more funding this year because they were funded at 80%.
What, excuse me, what is the total dollar amount if we just took all of these, where does that put us in terms of?
So that puts us at $1.17 million without taking into account the fact that, Boulder County Farmers Market has surpassed the individual agency limit. And they're the only ones, because we have more funding, the agency limits were actually raised a little bit. And so our education got a higher. So even the Art Center who made enough to get 100% of their ask. This number last year for the Art Center, that was the agency limit last year due to the amount of funding we had. So last year, the Art Center hit their individual agency limit. This year, because of the amount of funding we have, the individual agency is higher than that. So they technically did not hit the individual limit this year. So I did the math. If you bring them down, they can reach. So they're still receiving more than they received last year. The farmers market would receive $83,546. What I haven't done is broken it up between the programs. I was thinking of doing percentages and then just applying them to this award. So for example, adding how much they got for ECE with the WIC and seeing what percentages each award is, and then just splitting it up that way. I see Brian has a question.
Yeah, do you want me to drop off or go silent for that part of it, just so nobody feels, I mean, I can't vote on it, obviously, but I don't want anybody feeling comfortable discussing that.
That'd probably be best.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think when we get to that, we can do that, Brian.
You let me know. Okay.
Other questions or anything for Eliberto on this first? Karen Phillips. You're muted, Karen.
Karen, you're on mute.
I just wanted to say that the organization that came in at a different time, I just want to say that there was only 3 board members that meeting. And I think with that low turnout from the board that we should go ahead and fund them, even though they had a different time. But I just wanted to say that.
Brian, and then Kimberly.
Yeah, on that topic, I tend to agree that, you know, sometimes people get the schedule wrong or something. I think it's a little heavy-handed to not fund them because they missed their exact time. I'm glad to hear that they did, in fact, make it for an interview.
Kimberly?
Having never done this before, I'm just curious if we'll go into I'm curious to know why the agencies that didn't receive funding were just, or they scored low. I don't know like if that's part of the process.
So the 2 that were disqualified because they didn't come. They just didn't show up at all. And then the rest were just based on scores.
Just based on scores. Okay. Going up to not Luma, but PASO. One thing that I noticed in reviewing their application, I don't know if this is something that will be discussed, is the amount of money per beneficiary. And I know PASO was one, there was another one as well, I'd have to go through, but the amount of money being allocated per beneficiary just seemed completely off. And I don't know if that's something that it's not necessarily captured in the scoring system. So this might be more applicable for next year. But it was hard to score a few of them just because it didn't feel like you could justify $40,000 if only 9 individuals are benefiting from the services within the city of Longmont. So I just wanted to bring that up because I didn't see it, a way to express that in our scoring system.
So I will say that is the age, I've been on multiple grant committees, and that is the age-old question is, do you fund a mile wide, an inch deep? Or do you fund an inch wide and a mile deep? So depending on the program, some programs, and I'll speak on my behalf, like I've run programs where we didn't serve that many, but we served them at a very deep level, and it was a costly program. So that is a good question.
Yeah, and I think like with PASO, excuse me, it's a small number of individuals that get the training, but then they actually are trained then to provide services to, 3 to 5 children at a time at any given time. So there's like, there's sort of like add-on benefits to that that they don't necessarily capture in the application or in those like numbers, the stats of who they're serving. I was just going to add, I think I would agree with Karen and Brian in terms of the funding for PASO. They did miss their time. She came in almost immediately after her time. Like she got she was paying attention. She seemed to know, but then she also waited, I think, an hour on in the waiting room for us to finish everything else, which I think, you know, I don't want to say that like you have to have done that, but I do think that she was respectful of the fact that we had other hearings happening and, you know, wanted to let us finish that, and then came in and asked that we hear it. So I thought that that was sort of a good.
So Caitlin, can I make a comment on that?
Mhm.
I don't know if you can see my hand or not.
It came down, Karen.
Oh, sorry. So, I think a couple of things. To Kimberly's point about the cost per beneficiary. So that is something that Eliberto and I score. So we do take that in consideration. There's a question, you know, that we answer in terms of something to the effect of, is the funding request appropriate? That's not the right word, but you know, we do look at that. So we look at how much of the request is a percentage of their entire budget, how many people are being served. So that is scored. You might want to think about, you know, is that something that the advisory board wants to score rather than staff or in addition to staff? So something for the future. And again, I think I just want to clarify in terms of statewide parent coalition. So a couple things. So we emailed all of them when they didn't show up. And I think so they didn't just show up because they remembered, they showed up because they were fortunate enough to look at their email. So that's why they showed up. And we told them they would have to wait until the end. So, I'm just clarifying that, the kind of the rest of that, that story. Had she not looked at her email, she would have been in that same scenario. And but she did look at her email, and we did ask her to wait till the end.
Graham.
Thanks. I guess two questions. One is, it looks like the agencies that don't get funding due to low scores were in large part due to staff low score in the 20s. I'm wondering if there was a theme there from staff's perspective, or if it was just case by case, they each had specific agency deficiencies perceived by staff. And then my other question, unrelated, is are we going to distribute the excess funding that is not allocated tonight?
So yeah, I will say that, and I think we've gone over our staff scoring. Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I think, so we weighted, for example, we weighted the diversity question more this year on the staff side. So it hurt people if we didn't feel or their application didn't address it, you know, adequately, or not seeing the numbers that we wanted to see. So that was part of it. And then the other piece that we weighted a lot, or that had a lot of impact, was their financial stability. Looking at their finances and seeing, and I can tell you that for some of mine, I looked to Kimberly's earlier question, I looked more at how much of a percentage Longmont is in the request. Because of my background, I'm going to probably be more lenient on the mile wide, inch deep, or inch wide, mile deep piece. But I was a little more straight, like if your request for your program is 20-25% from Longmont, that to me was a lower score. And so those are the individual calls that Karen and I get to make, but those are where, Graham, I think if there was themes, it was around those two. I don't know, Karen, if you have other thoughts on that.
You know, Graham, I don't know what your question is about a theme. Well, so, which is interesting. So, but it really was based on our scores. And I think Eliberto hit it. I think for, I'm looking at the scores here. I think for several of those entities, their financial situation was you know, in pretty shaky. And then I think for some of the other ones, they just, yeah, so mostly I think was the finances for most of those.
Okay, thank you.
Just a
But
quick,
I'm curious about your question about the theme.
Well, the theme would just be, you know, is it
If
like,
you knew, we're going to score you. I'm curious about that question.
no, if the lows, the items that you scored them low on were similar across agencies. So it was like, oh, all these non-funded low scoring agencies have the sort of a similar or thematic issue, or if they each had their own reason for scoring low. I just didn't know if there was like a systemic deficiencies in these nonprofits that you scored them low on, or if they were sort of unique to the agency. So that was
Okay, thanks
Yeah.
for clarifying that.
Sure.
sort of a follow-on question to that. Eliberto, you mentioned that you're looking on that financial stability. You were looking at things like how many folks were served, Longmont versus other places, and that type of thing. I'm curious, one of the things that I think that we touched on it at some point was, you know, if someone was asking for $2,000 versus $100,000, you know, the level of financial stability doesn't need to be the same, right? Like there's much less of a risk for the city if we give a grant of $2,000 versus $100,000 in terms of that money being used. Was that part of the consideration at all for staff in terms of your scoring? Does that make sense?
I'm looking at the. I don't remember that being a huge. It was much more the actual numbers.
Okay.
Not that I didn't think about that, but I probably didn't put it above. Like if there was some concern, the concern probably took the priority.
Okay. Other questions for staff or on this matrix before we get into some of the specifics, maybe around. So Brian, I know you. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
So I guess the maybe it was Graham, I think, the question about, okay, so we haven't spent all the money. So I just wondered if you want to talk about we haven't spent all the money and what we were thinking about that. Do you want to go into that or go back to, so I don't, whatever, however you want to do that.
So depending on when Brian leaves and where we land on the farmers market piece, we might have between $110,000 and $160,000 not spent from this year's allocation. And I gave Karen 4 options that I was going to share with the board, and there could be other options, but I have 4 that I've thought through to share with the board on how on what the board would like to do.
Deanna.
I was just going to say, I don't know if we need to vote on it or just what we need to do with the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition, because if we don't fund them, then we have more money to distribute, right? So maybe we should figure out if we're funding them or not. And I guess to that point, on one hand, I do feel like everybody else, except for those other 2 agencies, managed to show up for their meeting, which is great. But I also feel like people make mistakes, and I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to punish the recipients of their services for their calendaring mistake, but I don't know if we need to vote on what we do with that or not.
You know, I think for the Statewide Parent Coalition, you know, I think, you know, they did have their hearing. We were able to have it that night, right? So I think our question was, do you want to do anything about that? Not the necessarily think about should we not fund them, but do they stay within the formula, or did you all want to do anything differently in terms of reducing them at all because of that? So it was really just something we highlighted for a question. Obviously, they are in there based on their score and the fact that, you know, they did call in, they did check their email, they did call in, and we were able to have their hearing that night. So I think it really just is a question, and I think we just wanted to bring that up to see if you wanted to do anything differently or leave it at where it is at the 40K level.
Can I ask one? Madeline, go ahead with your comment, and then I have a question for staff.
Okay, and it's more of a comment than anything. I am about to wind up my 9th year as of 12/31. And for the complete 9 years, we've been talking the same thing about the extra efforts that they should make to diversify their boards, their staffs, their client base. And we decided, I think a couple of years ago, that, and we let them know that if improvement was not there, if they weren't able to show where they, aggressively attacked improvement, that it would reflect in our decisions in terms of the allocations. And so I took that to heart in my scoring. And because otherwise, it will just continue. It'll just continue. And so I just wanted to say that yes, I did. And I think the last meeting before or during the sessions, we even said that we would let it reflect in our scoring rather than talking to individuals. So I just wanted to point that out, that I did take that to heart. I did do it, and I did it as we agreed. And so I'd like to see that continue once I'm gone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Madeline.
Thank you.
And I think that the board scores also were designed to weight whether they were addressing inequities, specifically if they had answered the question, because a bunch of them didn't answer that question. I noticed. So thanks for highlighting that, Madeline, and for continually being a voice for everyone else to pay attention to that and not let it sort of be something that we let them just slide by with. I'm curious. So we talked about PASO and that they had shown up and checked their email. Did either of the other two get in touch to ask for a rescheduled hearing or anything like that?
I would say they both followed up, but we are really clear in our instructions when we send out the information is that if you miss your hearing, you are disqualified. And so we are clear about that. We have consistently held people accountable for the health agencies accountable for that. So it is clear. And if they miss the submittal deadline, they are disqualified. If they miss their hearing date, they are disqualified.
Okay.
So they did follow up, and we said, it's pretty clear you're disqualified for whatever reason, and we've pretty much been consistent with that.
And my expectation, and I don't think we have had this. Obviously, we rescheduled some folks. Some folks came with, someone who was sick and so forth. And I assume that had someone written in and been like, I'm the only one who can come, but I'm really sick or my kid is barfing or whatever, that we would have, taken that in, letting us know ahead of time is much better than just not showing up.
Well, knowing ahead, if they knew ahead of time, then they would figure out a way to reschedule. So there was always that reschedule option. Is if you just don't show, Yep. That's you don't get, you're disqualified.
All right. So Deanna, I think you're right. We should figure out what we're going to do about PASO. And then I would suggest that we hear Eliberto's proposals for what to do with the overfunding before we decide to do what to do with Boulder County Farmers Market, because that might give us something. And it may be something where we need to discuss those things in tandem. And so I would say, like, let's see what those proposals are and where we land, and whether there's a certain point where it makes sense for Brian to excuse himself from those deliberations or not. Is that okay with, I want to double check that everyone feels comfortable with that, understanding that like how we fund Boulder County Farmers Market will impact actually our overall funding strategy.
Well, the only thing that I would suggest, Caitlin, is that Boulder County Farmers Market, they hit the max. So I think it really is just about, unless you all are saying that we're going to take that away somehow. So it really was how to allocate between those two programs at the reduced amount. But
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with PASO. Does anyone have an idea of what, let's start with whether we should fund them or not. We can start.
And again, I don't think that was our question, Caitlin, was about whether to fund them, because they did show, it was just like, did you want to reduce them, or you just want to keep them in the mix as they are? And I think either way is fine with us.
Okay. So if anyone has suggestions or thoughts on that, let's start with that. Brian.
Thank you, Caitlin. I suggest we keep them in the mix as they are.
Second.
Okay. I'm going to go with that's a motion. So let's vote on it. All in favor of keeping them in the mix as is, raise your hand. That's unanimous. All right. So then I think next, Eliberto, let's talk through the options in terms of that additional funding.
Okay, I'm gonna stop. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this, and I'm gonna bring out the PowerPoint. Okay, and then I'm gonna share it. All right, so, and again, the numbers are going to change. They're not going to change. So this, as it is right now, we have $160,127 to allocate with where we are right now in the matrix. And here's some options that I've thought through and shared with Karen, and I'm sharing it with the board. And again, if there are other options, we of course are open to that. But I have 4 prepared for you all tonight. So one is, there is a outreach program right now that is receiving funding via a state grant that will run out in March of 2022. We are working closely with that effort. They are engaging on a daily basis with our unhoused population, trying to get them to interact with services. And that is one potential. I think the whole program costs $151,000. So that is one potential thing that we could do. Another option is, our human services needs assessment identified quite a bit of needs, and they're not all represented in the actual applications that we received. And I put out a couple of examples. So for example, reliable transportation via car repair or reducing the digital divide. I didn't see any applications that really focused on that. So the board could recommend to create an RFP to explore these unmet needs. I mean, it would take some time, but that's something that we could do as well. So that's another option. Another option is city receives 13 million in ARPA money, and because housing is one of our issues, one of our top priority, we could use this money. The housing folks are asking the city, the people involved with housing are asking the city to use quite a bit of money from ARPA to increase the available housing stock, affordable housing stock. We could use this dollars as leverage to make to help in that process and increase the creation of these units. That's another option that we could use. We could leverage ARPA dollars for that. And then finally, the city is also, well, this is a city council. They want to work on mental health and childcare, and they've already assigned some dollars to that. Well, we could use some of these dollars to leverage that work as well. You know, whether it be increasing slots or training childcare staff. You know, we could throw our dollars in with what this council has already approved to leverage more outcomes that way. So the thing to remember though is that this would be a one-time infusion into whatever we decide to do, whether it's creating an RFP, whether it's funding LDARE, or whether it's helping with housing or childcare, mental health. These are one-time dollars, right? They're not ongoing. Not that they couldn't be, if an agency got this, they could apply again next year through the regular process. But these dollars themselves would be one-time dollars. So that is those are my options, and I am open to others. Do you want me to keep sharing, or do you want to discuss this and I can stop sharing this?
Why don't you go ahead and stop sharing, and then we'll open up discussion. Karen Roney.
Yeah, so I think the only thing that I would add, or just add to Eliberto's, I think that last slide, is that the amount of funding that the council set aside for mental health services is $300,000. So they had money available through I don't know, a couple sources. One was undesignated marijuana dollars, and there were some other sources. And so that's the amount that that council did tap for mental health services. So this would match that at some level, match that 300,000. And I think the amount for childcare was 150, or early education was 150,000 in one-time funds. So just to clarify that.
Great, thanks for that additional information. Graham.
I personally, just offhand, am leaning toward the RFP process, and I'm curious how much effort that is on staff, and you know, who might respond. Would it be more than, you know, the organizations that apply through the regular grant process? Would we really be able to capture the attention of other, you know, creative resources?
And Karen can speak to the RFP. It's always a challenge to draft an RFP, to get it out, but it's totally doable. So
it's not hard. I think what's what we have in our favor, I think, is that the whole human service agency funding process is exempted from the city's purchasing code. So that's what makes this process easier. To speak to Ellie, so if we were going through the regular city procurement process, that's a little more onerous, but it doesn't have to be, you know, it just is. I think it's really us deciding, the advisor board deciding, you know, in what areas do you want to focus, and we don't have to make it a huge, complicated request for proposal process. So, you know. It is doable. for sure. And, or we wouldn't have put it on the option. So, you know, and I think our thought around that was we could either scramble and figure out, well, what are we going to do with this money? Or we can pause and think about it. And, you know, and to look at, you know, is there something else that we really haven't gotten in our assessment that we think we should release a proposal for, or what? It just gives us a time to breathe and think about how to best invest those dollars.
Kimberly.
Just curious in the hierarchy of needs of our community right now, and if things have changed since the identified needs of car repair and what was the other one? I forget.
Digital divide.
Digital divide. Like, I just see more urgent concerns right now, and I think that the first and last options have a more direct impact on where our community is right now. But honestly, I'm curious to know if there is any insight as to what the highest need is right now for Longmont, based off of the options provided.
At least from like over the course of the 2 years on the board, Karen, Ellie Bertrand, other folks who've been on the board, I mean, affordable housing is sort of like the drum that is beaten. It's an urgent need, but it is also something that takes a long time to put into place, right? Like, it's not like you can turn on a dime and suddenly have affordable housing. So it's something that just is like perpetually there because no one in the region is really able to like sort of catch up with the need for it from what we've seen. Eliberto, and then Karen.
So I just forgot, Karen, we talked about one more thing, and that was using at least some of this funding for a human services need assessment refresh. I don't think it would take a lot of money, but we could, the board could say, well, you know, we did this in 2019, 2020. Do we need to do it again in 2022, 23 to get a clear picture on just what Kimberly's asking about needs? I can't imagine it, and Karen, you can, I can't imagine it being more than 20 to 30,000 of those dollars to do a refresh. It could be less. I don't know, since we have a lot of the data, a lot of the data already in hand. So that's option number 5 that I forgot to put on that we did talk about.
Karen.
So I think so certainly what we are seeing, you know, we're seeing a lot of things, but what I would say is we are repurposing some of our CDBG dollars from rental assistance to utility assistance. So we are seeing in terms of the city's utility bills, there are many accounts and there are millions of dollars that people are in arrears in their rental assistance, and so our utility assistance. So you know, so that is an emerging need. Our CDBG dollars is about 500,000. And that will get some of it, but the amount of accounts that are in arrears is I don't know. One of the last numbers I remember was over $3 million.
I think it's like 2.8 million.
I'm sorry?
2.8 million.
Okay. A little less than $3 million. So anyhow, so that is a need. And certainly rental assistance is out there, but there is a lot of federal emergency rental assistance coming through the feds, through the through the county. So there are many of millions of dollars for that. And so off the top of my head, I know rental assistance, utility assistance is one of the things that is a pretty significant need right now.
Karen, a quick clarifying question for you on that. do you happen to know if any of that federal money, so you mentioned for rental assistance, do you know if any of it is like going toward like eviction representation or things like, I know Boulder now has like representation if people are being evicted.
They have a special tax and a
Yeah.
special fee that funds that. So
But
that,
Almont doesn't have anything like that, and the county
We-
isn't funding like
no,
anything like
no.
that.
We have good old fashioned mediation services. You know, but we don't have what came out through what they call the newer no eviction without
Without
representation. Right, and that's a special fee that the city of Boulder voters approved. So that comes with money to pay an attorney. So yeah, we don't have that.
Brian and then Deanna.
Thank you, Caitlin. Since it hasn't come out yet, I just wanted to check, and because maybe this is off bounds or out of bounds, but a number of our agencies that didn't get funding had scores of like 79 and 78, which in prior years they would have received funding. And I think about like mental health and queer asterisks, the kind of services that they offer. Is it an option to consider partially funding, even if it's at 30% or 25%, a threshold, say 75 to 80% with some of that money? And a little bit of it's a kind of a bird in the hand versus two in the bush kind of thing.
All right. I don't know that any option is off the table at this point. We have flexibility. So, Deanna.
So we haven't really talked very much about the option, I forget, maybe 2, that was the federal funding position that expires in March. I guess I'm just curious if there's any impression, is the position just going to disappear, or are they going to find funds somewhere else, right? Like, I'm not sure. I guess what in my head I'm trying to do is cross some of these off, right? And so I'm trying to assess how significant that need is for that position and whether it's likely that they'll find money to replace that position if it's a substantive position.
So we are applying for the county on our behalf is applying for more federal state that goes to the state for it, but there's no guarantee that we will get that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Caitlin, if I could ask a second question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so with regard to working on an updated needs assessment, I just can't remember how often we do those needs assessments. But it does seem to me that coming out of a full-blown worldwide pandemic, it makes sense to take a breath and figure out where people are at after all of this. I mean, God knows if we actually ever get through this, but it would be maybe, I think, helpful to really see how people are coming out of this and what they really need going forward for funding in the next few years. If we're not planning on doing a needs assessment for a while, I think that might be a good use of funds, just personally.
So just to respond to that, we are now in a 5-year cycle. We are in the same 5-year cycle as a consolidated plan for our block grant funds. And so we did envision that somewhere in midterm that we would do some kind of a refresh of that assessment, because 5 years is certainly a long time. So there would certainly be that opportunity. But yeah, we envisioned an update, not a full blown assessment, but an update around mid about year 3.
Graham.
Thanks, Caitlin. I support talking about Brian's idea of funding partially some of these organizations that scored low. And then I had another thought, which just might be crazy, but you know, we've emphasized the diversity issue with the organizations, and I perceived that some of them had the resources to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training and hire consultants and even staff a position for that, and others don't and didn't. And I'm wondering if some of this money could be paid to host sort of a training seminar for nonprofits on how to diversify their boards and their services and their staff. And I'm sure there's a consultant out there in the universe that we could pay to put on a multiple hour training for the nonprofits in Longmont, to support them in that effort and not just grill them annually on it and then punish them financially, but actually sort of come alongside them and help. So.
Deanna, did
Provide
you
some
have-
level of technical assistance
Mhm.
and training is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Deanna, did you have something else?
Yeah, sorry, I'm hogging all the raising my hands. So I had one other point towards what Brian and Graham were talking about. And maybe this is not the right way to say this, but I'm just going to indelicately say it. We asked council for extra funds to cover the needs here. And if we go back to council and say, well, we don't need all the money you gave us, how is that going to impact budgets going forward, right? I'm a little, I don't know, because I'm not savvy enough to understand how that impacts maybe budgetary decisions. And I'm not saying that we should take a position to spend money just because we have it, but the needs are there. And I am a little concerned that if we tell city council we didn't need all the money they gave us, that next year they're going to take some of that away. I don't know if that's a reasonable concern or not, but thought I'd point it out.
I'd like to open up a conversation about that as well. So Brian and Graham suggested maybe funding some of the ones that had gotten zeroed. I'm also kind of curious what it would look like if we expanded the score ranges a little bit for the ranges that so right now there are like 11-point spread. What if we took that to like a 13-point spread for top, middle, bottom? How close does that get us to using all of our funds? Even like, because we have a few that are maybe on the edge there. Would it push a few people up and then also fund an additional, so we're still giving to the highest scored organizations? Karen, oh,
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
Karen Roney.
So, I would say a couple things. One, I don't think you need to worry about, is the council going to swoop in and say, oh, well, we're going to take that money back if you don't need it. Probably if we would have known that we were going to get another $500,000 going into this process, we would have probably reorganized. We would have thought about our process maybe a little differently. But so I'm not worried about that. And the thing that if you do want to, I think to Caitlin's point, Eliberto and I did talk about, we could certainly make some adjustments in terms of the formula, and bring that back and see what that looks like. And I think the thing that we were cautious about is that it is a goal to fund everybody, regardless of what their scores are, because some of these agencies scored pretty low. And so is it that we really want to, we called it, Eliberto still reeling from a 4th place football trophy, like a participation trophy. So is this about, we want to dole out participation trophies to everyone? Because we could find a way to fund every agency that applied. You just changed up the matrix and the scoring, and you can make that happen. Or do we want to be more discerning and say, that our scores matter, and that we think we now have the capacity to fund some of these entities at a higher level, that are doing, that are that scored in a way that says they're doing good work, they're managing their agency well. So that's kind of where we ended up, that we landed, is that your scores and your performance matters, rather than we're going to give everyone some money, and that we could take the time to be thoughtful about how we do want to invest those dollars. We could certainly go back and we could amend contracts if we decided that that's what we wanted to do. So but we could certainly go back and modify the funding matrix, because we had a couple of other ideas around that, if that is what you wanted us to do. So that was really our.
Alberto, could you reshare the matrix that you had so that folks can see that? I don't think that was shared out.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Give me 1 second.
And Karen Roney, did we, do you remember a few years back, that's exactly what we did? When we had money left, we went back and made some modifications to our formula and to our matrix. Or am I thinking about something else?
We did.
I think we've done that in the past, because it rarely came out that with our scoring matrix, we either allocated more money than we had, or
right.
So we certainly went through and did some looked at the scoring matrix and made it work out that way. So absolutely, we did that.
Yeah, I thought, and it worked well, if I recall correctly.
Alberto, you have this open as a PDF. Can I keep wanting to see this by scores? What are the top scored agencies? Is that a weird? I'm wondering.
What do you mean, Caitlin?
I'm wondering if we could sort it so that the agencies that had the highest total score are shown at the top.
Oh, I see.
Just so we can, right now, I think we've got them by category, but obviously,
right.
Yeah, let me try to do that. I do have an Excel version of this. I'm gonna stop sharing. Let's see if I can do this.
So I guess kind of other thoughts. I mean, do you? Oh, I'm sorry, Caitlin. I'm taking over your role.
No, you're fine. I'm also curious if folks have other thoughts on what our options are here with this. Brian.
Thank you. I definitely hear the concern or appreciate the focus on quality. Those agencies that are doing what we want them to do in, serving the community in a good way, et cetera. I think for my part, the suggestion of looking at that category of 75 points to 80 was not intended to indicate kind of sweeping everybody gets, you get a 20 and you get a 20 kind of thing. But whether in fact, if we have funds that are unspent, there would be a benefit to the community by funding some of those who didn't quite make the threshold, that we've got a little bit of generosity we can give. And I think in part, and thank you, Caitlin, for requesting that if we can get this sorted, it'll give us an idea of kind of how large that component is or how small it is. Personally, I feel the 75% threshold is a good one. I also really was intrigued when it was moved to 80 with more funding, because I think it does create a greater incentive to deliver on some of the things that we measure. But given that there's a little bit extra, will residents of Longmont benefit by our kind of moving a little bit on that this year?
All right, here we go. I have So the RS Center is the highest. Of course, FS scored very high, but disqualified. Rise Against Suicide scored high and would have been funded, but they're disqualified.
And our cutoff was basically 80, right?
Yep.
So we've got 1, 2, 3 that are within 5 points of that.
Right. And I mean,
And none of those are actually large requests.
no. You know, and a lot has to do with how much you requested.
Sorry, what'd you say, Eliberto?
You know, a lot has to do with how much you requested. We can't control that. And I think I've told this board before, it's like housing stability may be one of our highest priorities, but we don't control what people ask for.
Yeah. So I mean, I think to Brian's point, you know, even if we took those 3 that are within 5 points of it and said we funded them, say like at 40% or 50%, that's still relatively a drop in the bucket in terms of our total funding, or in terms of the total amount that we still have available. But there are also some in, you know, that are a little bit, that are in, you know, the low 80s, mid 80s, where we could up their funding as well. So curious if other folks have thoughts. Karen and then Brian.
Well, why don't you go with Brian first?
Okay, Brian.
Well, I don't think that was quite fair, Karen, but we'll go anyway. I would propose we fund the scores 75 to 80 at 50%.
Deanna.
I'll second that.
Okay, in which case, let's take a vote on,
Yep.
but, oh, go ahead, Karen.
So you want to have a discussion?
Oh, yes. Should we have a discussion about funding those 3 at 50%?
So and I don't know, Eliberto, you can hop in here. I mean, I think the thing that we wanted to get away from was saying, okay, this is how we're going to do things, but we're going to make this modification that's, again, kind of outside of that formula. And now we had this discussion last year. And so, you know, so I don't know whether you, to your point, I think Caitlin is that if we make that change, that's fine, but it's not, it's kind of I think you said it's a drop in the bucket in terms of how much money that we do have available to distribute. So Eliberto, if you want to hop in, you know, if we went in and, you know, modified, you know, some of the overall formulas, would that might help us to allocate more of that unallocated funding. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Karen. So this is, so I mean, and we can do whatever I just put it in there so you all could see what the difference is. I do have other formulas where we fund everybody. And you know, to Caitlin's earlier point, while we kept it at, I think it was like a 15-point spread instead of an 11-point spread. I don't think I went to 13. I think it was easier to go to 15. And there's one where I think I went to 20. But again, I think the point. So to me, there's a couple of things. One is it is the idea of being formulaic, right? And I think I've talked to this board about this before. Formulaic doesn't mean the formula is perfect. It never is, but it gives you a sense of above the fray, right? It's to a certain extent. it's about the formula, not about what we feel is deserving or not deserving, and it's about the scores, and where the deserving piece comes is in your individual scores. So that's what being formulaic does, is it takes you outside of having to have those types of conversations. But we control the formula, right? So we can change the formula if we feel that the formula that we've created is too restrictive, or if we feel it's not restrictive enough. But to just, my recommendation, I would recommend against dealing with it with individual agencies. If you feel the formula is too restrictive, then I can work on a different formula. And it may or may not change things a whole lot. I could make it to where everybody gets funded. We're 60 is the lowest score. And then nobody got below 68. So I can make it where, everybody gets something. So those are things to think about.
Karen and then Brian. Karen Roney. You're muted.
I'm sorry, my hand was just super raised. It's down.
Okay,
Sorry.
Brian, go ahead.
I see the logic in not like just saying, okay, well, let's make this exception, let's make that exception, but to use the formula for its purpose, which is to, kind of give us a strong directional indication of how this funding is best allocated. I do think that with Caitlin's original thought of increasing the spread to say 12 points or 13 points, it's essentially I feel the outcome will be very similar to saying add those other 5 points in. However, some people may move, they may be on the threshold between, they're at 89 and they'll move up to the, that next threshold or something like that. So it will have a different impact, but I would be in favor of that. Eliberto, is there any chance you can just like push that button, that crunch button, and make it happen?
It would probably take me a few minutes. I probably couldn't just push a button.
We'll give you 3
You
minutes.
want to send me the Excel sheet? I'll put the number cruncher that's out there on it.
So what I can show, I do have other formulas. I could potentially show those, but they're different than this, right?
And Karen Phillips has a question.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I just would like to see everybody get something. I just, they've gone to the trouble to go do all this and they're helping people out. And I just feel bad. We can't give them something. Everybody gets something, but I'm more in favor for that.
I'll have my picture with my 4th place trophy.
Other thoughts or feedback here? I guess maybe if Eliberto's work is maybe looking at crunching some numbers there, I can suggest that we talk about Boulder County Farmers Market and the fact that they've hit the agency limit that we set for a particular area, in which case we could ask Brian to leave for a few minutes while we discuss that. How do folks feel about going ahead and doing that?
Just shoot me a text or something when you want me to, or do you want me to just, I can honestly, Scout's honor, just silence you. And so I don't hear anything, but I can also drop off if you want to shoot me a text.
I'm fine if you want to mute, turn off your video, and so forth, and we can.
I think for transparency, why don't you give us your number and we will text you and then we'll let you back in. So that way we're all good.
All right.
Yeah.
303
Uh-huh.
775
Got it.
4599. And just for this purpose, Karen, don't be,
I was gonna
Just
say, we're
using
gonna
that number.
have to cut that out of the recording.
I know, man. I might want to start a little farm, right? I might be hitting you up for one of those grants or loans, and you got that 30 million.
All right, we'll talk about that.
Thanks.
All right, now that he's gone, anyone want to talk about the farmer's market? Or Brian? Kidding. Graham, go ahead.
I think it makes sense just to take the percentages and divvy it up that way between the two programs.
That math I can do pretty quickly.
Eliberto, can I ask you to resort this by the areas so we can see? Because did we hit the overall limit for the food?
Oh, good question. I don't know. Hold on, I got this from there. There you go.
Impact area, I think.
Impact area, yes. Let's go A to Z. All right, so
What does our total look like for food and nutrition there? If you
let me do this. Let me do this here. Hold on.
okay.
Let's start. Oh, come on. Now I'm showing my naivete.
I think it wants the open parenthesis.
Can I do just, okay. So that'd be J, where do we start here? J10 through J15?
15? Mhm.
All right, let's see. Oh yeah, so that's 265.
Yep. And what was our total allocation supposed to be for food and nutrition?
167.
Okay. All right. So I'd concur with Graham in terms of allocating it based on, I think their scores are so close to each other. There's no sense in differentiating based on the score. Like I would say we should just do it based on the fact that, you know, allocate give them the total agency amount and do it by percentage based on the request amount.
Hold on. So this right here is 78% of the entire request, of the entire award, not the entire request, of what they awarded based on the formula right now. So 0.78 times what I say it was 86, 83, 546. You get about 65. So then this would be 166. And so this is 22%. So this would be 18. So that would be their new. That would be their new amounts. Yeah, that's right. And that would give them the max. That would give that way they would hit the individual
Max for that.
So I'm gonna change this and see what happens. Hold on. Where does that put us? gets us closer to the actual priority area.
Allocation or
Yeah.
the designation for the
Yeah.
area.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's 167 in this. And to be honest, folks, we've always gone over like on education. I haven't done the math, but I guarantee you that we're going over on it, even though education moved up.
Do we, are there any other ideas or options here on Boulder County Farmers Market or funding them differently that we want to discuss? Funding them at the 80% or whatever it was, rather than the agency limit. I mean, they're the only one who hit the agency limit, right?
This year,
This year, yes. So,
others have in the years past, but this year they're the only one.
yep. So, do we want to go forward with these numbers? Do we want to talk about other options for Boulder County Farmers Market? Deanna?
I'm just gonna move to fund them in the amounts on this spreadsheet as modified, and I don't remember what the exact percentages are, but as Alberto was modified on the spreadsheet. That's my motion.
Okay, do we have a second? Kimberly has seconded. All in favor, raise your hand, please. All right.
All right, so then we do not need this line anymore.
Correct.
So am I good with texting Brian?
Yes, please.
Okay. I will do that.
Deanna, did you have something that you want to say before Brian comes back?
Just forgot to take my hand down, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
I'm gonna reshuffle this, Kevin, to go back to our conversation about scores, just so that I don't get confused.
That is totally fine.
Brian said he's not coming back in.
All right.
So Caitlin, can I just make a comment?
Go ahead.
So I think getting back to Kimberly's question about the need, I think the other two areas, which is why the council did allocate additional money in the 2020 budget for mental health and for childcare, that those are also two pretty critical needs that we have seen emerge from as a result of the pandemic. So it just hit me, as I was looking at that. So that is, one of the reasons why we had the recommendation to leverage some of this money with some of the council's money to address those two pretty significant needs that have emerged, in addition to rental assistance and utility assistance. So I just want to make that comment. I forgot to add that.
To add to that, I feel like a lot of things that we were hearing in the hearings from the childcare providers that were applying was that there's a lot of challenges there in ways that, like, our needs assessment 2 years ago maybe would not have captured, in terms of like hiring and being able to attract and keep childcare workers. And so another thing I was thinking about was, allocating more money to that, but also we've got a few here like that. I think it's the PASO program, where they are training folks to be childcare providers in Longmont. That's kind of a unique option. Like that's a creative, I'd say, option that they're doing that is going to have long ranging things. So I'm wondering if like for the education and skill building for childcare or for mental health, whether, you know, it makes sense for us to think about funding those at a higher level from here, or if we would want to put out an RFP or something different. I don't know what the right answer there is, but we've got folks that are doing this work that we already know of here. So welcome other thoughts or opinions from folks. Kimberly?
I really like the idea of using the current needs, and you know, if that's what's been identified by the city, I think having the flexibility of leveraging the funds based off of what the city assesses in terms of the interventions. PASO is a wonderful program. I think its limitations are that it's family, friend, and neighbor childcare, so it's limited by licensing. So I think the funding could potentially be utilized to reach a broader need if it was incorporated into a larger effort. And it sounds like the city is initiating that. So I guess I would vote to leverage the funds through the city effort versus adding more to what we've already allocated.
One thing that PASO mentioned in their hearing, I can't remember who were on those hearings, is the certification that folks get is actually the same as for a home licensed one, not just for friends and family. The state is considering actually differentiating those in the future, and they're advocating for that not to be the case, because right now they can leverage essentially the friend family to go into essentially the next level up of like a home daycare center that can accommodate more than just friends and family to help meet the childcare needs in the state. So that was one thing that came up there, but I think your point about leveraging it toward the city is great. Other Karen, Roney.
Well, if there are other comments, I just, you know, because it's 8:30, and so I think we just were wanting to see how we want to move forward. So you know, if there are some ideas that are off the table, that would be good to know. If and I guess I just went back and checked with my partner in crime in the other office, and you know, so it might be that we might need to schedule a subsequent meeting to flesh out some of these ideas. So I mean, if you want us to rework or to really modify the formulas based on some of the things that we talked about and bring back some different options that will use up more of that money, certainly options that everyone gets some funding. You know, I mean, we have a variety of options for the modifying the formula that we can certainly bring back. If that's the way that the advisory board wants to go, if there was anything out of the other options that you thought might be worth at least pursuing or having a greater discussion about, we could do that and bring back some options with that. So if there's anything that you want to narrow, take off the table, that would help us to continue to move forward, that would be great.
Yeah. Madeline and then Deanna.
Yes, yeah, I would definitely like what Karen just suggested, that one, we have a separate meeting that and then in that way they can bring back other options, because since Karen Phillips I made the statement that that she made about, wanting everybody to get something, particularly since we have the funds. Yeah, I'd like more options. As far as my vote, that's what I'd like to see happen. Thank you.
Deanna.
So I was just thinking about Karen Roney's sort of suggestion that we narrow this a little bit. And I think that I would be comfortable taking off the table, figuring out how to spend those funds on things like car repair, that option for car repair and bridging the digital divide. I know that was in the initial needs assessment, but that doesn't necessarily seem contemporary with where we're at right now. And if we're going to go off needs assessment, I think probably putting it towards utilities, for instance, would be more beneficial to the community right now. So I guess I would suggest that we take that option off the table. And I don't know, do we need to go through the other options, or I know it's already 8:30. So if we want to try and narrow it, I don't want you staff to be doing a bunch of work for options that we aren't necessarily interested in pursuing.
Brian. You're muted.
Thank you. Twice. That's the first time that's ever happened. That's really weird. So I'm thinking if we increase the spread by 13, and then to Karen Phillips' point, we can look at maybe having a 50% threshold for those that are above, let's see here, 68.3 or above, and up to 75. But more importantly, I really support the adding the money to the mental health and childcare effort, because I think both of those are front and center. Childcare right now is critical to getting a really important part of our workforce back to work. And of course, mental health is always critical. So that would be my druthers.
I'd add on that I feel like everything we heard in the hearings and we saw was that the childcare providers were also helping bridge the digital divide for kids, so like the YMCA was making sure that kids had access to internet to do their homework and the after school programs and stuff like that. And so, it's not directly addressing that need, but they're not separate right now. They're very integral to one another in many ways. And so yeah, I would second the option of like widening the spread, funding. I think we put those like 75 to 80 at like 50% already. So I don't know if we want to do the last two at 50% and then the rest of it toward the childcare and mental health initiative that the city is funding. I like that idea. Brian.
Sorry to take up so much airtime here, but I think that's a good idea. And what strikes me, I feel like this field of applications has actually, like the median score has really increased across the board in this recent round. I may be wrong about that because it is just a perception, but it may be helpful to think about, okay, like senior housing options, a way forward, medicine horse programs, some of these that didn't score particularly well. If we give them some funding, maybe there's some opportunity to help them be stronger agencies by showing them how to, do this a little better so that they don't fall on these low scores, provided that we believe they provide important services. That is a tertiary, I know it's a staff thing, so I wouldn't make it a contractual element. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to help.
I mean, I think we have seen, I thought the quality of applications overall looked different this year than last year. Some were worse, and there were some that were definitely like, oh, you definitely learned from last year's application and the questions we asked you and where you got funded. So Anyway, I think Madeline just has her hand still up from before. So does anyone else, it sounds like, and I'd love to know if this is not the case, we'd like to see, we're thinking we're going to do another meeting and we'd like to see some spread on this to see if we can increase some of the funding for the ones who got the higher scores, leaving the ones who are lower. At
You
sort of
can't,
that. Go ahead.
you really can't increase the funding. We're at 90%. I mean, unless you want to go into 95%, you know, we're pretty high.
No, I meant more like instead of it cutting off at like 90 for the you know, or what's the cutoff for 100% funding right now? Instead of it cutting off at 104, have it cut off at 100?
So why don't you let us, because we have some
Okay.
different funding schemes. So why don't you just let us work those funding schemes? We can bring those back. And so you can see how that all plays out. That makes the most sense to me.
Yep. And
if-
then I
if-
think,
If you're good with that.
and then I think do folks want to consider other options besides the mental health and childcare? One for any additional funds that don't get allocated here. Because I think all four of the options Eliberto presented at the top were essentially taking unallocated funds and putting them towards something completely different. And it sounds like we were wanting to do a little bit of both, reallocate more funds here, but then also put money to leverage something. Do we want staff to focus in on that mental health and childcare, or any of the others that we want them to do any work on? Graham.
I think the utilities assistance is worthwhile looking into.
Yep. I agree.
Okay. Anything else that folks want to? Karen and Eliberto, does that give you a pretty good direction on where to go next? And then my understanding is we would need to do a special meeting. When are we supposed to present this to council? Or our recommendations? What is the preferred date for that?
The last date we can do that in 2021 would be December 14th.
Okay.
So
we would need the recommendations by when, Karen? 'Cause I know that we have to get stuff.
well, we'll
before
figure
that.
that out. But I think we can get started in putting everything together, and then we'll have to plug in the numbers. So, I mean, I would say that the latest we should have do you want us to set that meeting? Obviously, we could either try to do a meeting next week or the week after Thanksgiving. Is there a preference?
Would you all be able to send out information on the different funding schemes for folks to take a look at?
Yeah. Yeah, we
ahead?
could. Yeah.
That way, if we could have that next week, and then if we plan to meet the week after Thanksgiving, everyone will hopefully have had some time. And then if there are questions for staff, if folks could take a look at it and send questions to you all to prep for that meeting, just to give us a head start so that
Right.
Yeah,
because we were
we
crunching
won't
up.
have any room to schedule another meeting after that.
Yeah, so we were crunching numbers up until the very last minute. So that would give you some time to really look at some of the various schemes. And I think that would be good.
How do folks feel like that's a good next steps?
Yes, sounds great to me.
Okay, I see lots of thumbs up. Fantastic.
So to clarify, oops, my hand is still up, sorry. So to clarify, we will work the schemes, get those out to the advisory board next week. And we would look for a date that week after Thanksgiving to have our final meeting about this. Is that correct?
That is
Perfect.
correct.
Do you want us to do a doodle poll, or do you have any preference right now? While we have folks on, it might be nice to, if we have calendars, we could look at.
I was gonna say, does Wednesday or Thursday, so we're meeting on a Wednesday now. Does Wednesday or Thursday,
The
December
first or
1st
second?
December 2nd, 7 a.m.
I've got, on the second, I have a HOA meeting. I can't go to Thursday.
So,
So is the first an option for most folks?
Yep,
December 1st.
the first.
let's see, I see a yes from Karen. I think yes from Deanna, Catherine, Kimberly, does the first work for you? Okay, Graham and Brian. Wednesday, the 1st
Evening,
evening,
probably.
7 p.m.
Not for me, but I'm happy to send in my comments, and I'm about to roll off the board, so I'm a lame duck anyway. Like, nobody really gives a rip about what I say at this point, especially
That's not
staff.
true. That's
I
not
care,
true.
Brian.
I think you have another
You're the
year,
best, Brian.
Brian. Brian, are you sure you roll off?
I'm pretty sure I roll off, Karen.
Yeah, because he was chair last year and he had to have been on the board the year before.
I don't think you roll off, Brian.
Madeline, does Thursday the 1st
We'll-
work for
we'll
you?
figure
Or
it
Wednesday
out.
the 1st work for you?
I've got you for
Um,
Graham
I-
rolls off. Madeline, her term ends. She's term limited, and Kat had to reapply because she filled an unexpired term. I don't think you expire, Brian, until next year.
I
We'll
feel
have
like
a
I
we'll have a
expired.
conversation. So,
Caitlin, I'll make it work somehow. Yeah.
and we could even meet earlier, I think, if folks wanted to. You know, if you don't want to wait till 7, if you wanted to meet, I don't know,
Earlier would be
6,
better for me.
6,
I'm available
6:30.
before 5.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm available before 5 or 5:30 on the 1st. If that's
Yeah, me too.
okay.
Me too.
So why don't we think, so Erica, so we'll plan on the 1st and maybe we'll then doodle up and figure out what would, if there's a time frame, because if we do a lot of this work prior, at least I don't think we'll probably have a long time that we need to meet,
Right.
is my theory. So maybe we can make it a briefer meeting.
Yeah, between 4 and 6 would work perfectly.
Okay. All right, we'll see what we can figure that out.
Okay. If you want to doodle it, and I mean, we talked about Wednesday or Thursday, we narrowed it to
I
Wednesday. If
think
we
it's
wanna do Tuesday or Wednesday, like, that's probably, we'll figure something out.
So
Ideally,
it sounds
we
like
get it from there.
December 1st, the Wednesday, and then if we can maybe hold it a little bit earlier in the afternoon, that might work better for folks. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We have one more item. We have other business on the agenda. Does anyone have other business that we need to talk about tonight? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, Madeline moves, Deanna seconds. See you all soon. Have a lovely November.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Have a great
Good night.
Thanksgiving.
You
Thank
too.
you all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.